And Heidi, are we able to start?
Yeah, we're live now.
Live now. Okay, so kia ora everyone. Look, very important workshop. Thank you very much for your attendance. We are going to have this workshop, 3 sections with questions at the end of each section. So I'll hand it over to Vida now. Kia ora.
You're on mute, Vida.
That will help. After 2 years of doing this, you think we'll have got that down pat. Kia ora, Iona, Councillor Pennant. I first of all want to start by thanking the team. Ollie especially has a lot of work into getting this presentation ready for you today. Thank you, of course, as well, Joe and Paul, who will be presenting the first part of this presentation around the bike network plan, the consultation we have just finished, and then also the proposed changes and how we propose to deliver this the next 10 years. The second part will be Claire, who will be presenting the first 2 transitional projects, the processes we're using for them and the designs. And then behind that is sitting the rest of the team who have also contributed. So thank you, team. I also wanted to quickly start by acknowledging that the city is in a state of stress at the moment. And we will be mindful of this as we deliver our projects. Wellington and New Zealand is lucky enough to be in the position that we're first now experiencing COVID in our community. Our high vaccination puts us in a good position for this, but we're all anxious about what this will mean for us. And the protest right now is also adding to the stress. So I just want to make sure that we all acknowledge that and that we're cognizant of that as we're working forward. We are, as I said, in that fortunate position that we are 2 years behind a lot of other places around the world, and we can learn from those cities about which levers can help our communities and businesses through this period while continuing to implement our long-term vision for the city that you have set as the leaders of the city. From observations around the world, we know that many cities have been delivering bike networks and bike connections, especially pop-up or transitional projects to connect the CBD with the suburbs where a lot of people live, to ensure that there is that choice for people that may be nervous around using public transport. Another successful ingredient that many cities have been using is looking at, like we're doing, outdoor dining and retail space outside so that people can social distance. Fars, our urban regeneration and design manager, and his team, they've been working really hard this last month to finalise our parklet guidelines, and these are on the cusp of being operationalised. And these also include a fast-track case management process to help the hospitality sector in particular. So I just wanted to frame that a little bit before we get in. Ollie, if we can go to the next slide, please. So as I said, the first part is around the whole bike network and that the strategic document that has been in consultation. The second part of the presentation will zoom in on the 2 transition projects. Next slide, please. On the 10th of March, we'll be coming back to the Planning and Environment Committee with the finalised bike network plan for adoption. A connected network for people to bike and scoot around the city. This plan is a delivery mechanism for a number of the key strategies you have set for the city and the region in the last 3 years. So just quickly to touch on a few of them, we know that 34% of our emissions come from our transport network. If our Te Ata Te Kura targets are to be met, creating a safe and viable low carbon transport alternatives is essential and one of the most effective tools we have in our toolbox to be carbon neutral by 2050. In 2019, we approved the Bike Network Bus Priority Action Plan. One of our key actions was to install bus lanes. It makes sense to install these at the same time as we install bike lanes. And later you'll see in this presentation when Claire takes you through the transition projects that we're proposing to use this. The parking policy set the hierarchy for how our street space should be used and prioritise this through the different types of streets. And this will be really, really important as the city grows. And as a region, we have committed to these 3 targets, which are on the screen, They're ambitious, and Wellington, with our density and as the regional economic centre, we probably actually need to over-deliver on these targets to ensure that the region as a whole functions and meets them. So Ollie, can I get you to go to the next slide? So we know that our why is clear, what we've decided, what was decided through the LTP, where will be locked in with the bike network plan, and now we're ready to go with the how on each route. Through planning for growth, we're changing the way that we live, and we need to change the way that we move to support that growth. Change, please. Through engagement and consultation and then subsequent decisions, Council, we've focused on providing and enabling development to help address the housing crisis, as well as create healthy and well-functioning connected communities. The district plan enables significant densification, and we've removed car parking requirements for new developments. Urban planning and transport planning need to go hand in hand. We cannot continue to allocate our street space or move around as we currently do. The distribution needs to be rebalanced. There's simply not enough space on our streets for status quo to continue with our forecast growth. Getting more people to walk, bike, and scoot and take public transport is essential for our city's wellbeing and to keep our streets flowing so that the space that is needed for those that need to drive continues to be there to keep our city functioning and safe. The housing crisis is affecting house prices and rents, but there's also some interesting research coming out about how it's also affecting families' transport budgets. So next slide, please. A safe and connected bike network can increase equity of our transport network, and bus lanes will also increase the viability of public transport for all. Next, please. So there is a demand. People want this. E-bikes and electric scooters are on back order, and we're expecting import numbers to surpass the number of new cars being imported this year. Choice is important, and today's micro-mobility options flatten hills, allowing Wellingtonians to take advantage of our topography. We see that if the infrastructure is there, people will use it. Change. As I touched, Auckland and other cities around the world have also seen how people-centric changes to our transport network benefit everyone, including business. Next. And as I touched on earlier, many cities have been installing bike lanes as part of their COVID response and simultaneously as a pathway towards their long-term city visions. The COVID-19 crisis has led to important changes in behaviour and travel behaviour. And we've seen early evidence already here in New Zealand as well that people shift from public transport to cars as we react to the pandemic. Internationally, governments and also Australian cities have incentivised cycling as a low-cost, sustainable and space-saving mode of transport that reduces the risk of COVID-19 transmission. Melbourne, we talked to last week, they've seen their VKT levels go back up to 91%, while public transport patronage is still only at 45%. We know that around approximately 20% of Wellingtonians use public transport to get to and from work in the central city, and many of these will be looking for alternatives as COVID cases rise. The graph in the slide shows a sharp increase in bike mode share as a result, so spurred on by the pandemic, but also that many cities in Europe have responded with these pop-up bike lanes as part of that response. Next slide, please. And so where I wanted to end is to focus back in on Wellington and talk about our network and how we propose to deliver it. And the team has been really, really busy the last 10 months, as I alluded to at the start, and the LTP decision meant that we needed to look at how we were doing this and step change in how we delivered cycleways in our bike network. There are 3 areas that we focused on mainly. The first one was to deliver the program. We needed to be set up to be fit to do this and fit for the future. So we've reorganised ourselves, and we have and asked recruiting for this team to deliver the program. Recruitment is pretty challenging, but it's but we think that we're getting there. We've also continued to review our processes and how we deliver these projects. In particular, the transitional program has been set up, a new way of working to accelerate the delivery of the instructed through the LTP. Secondly, we have, as instructed through the LTP, also done a refresh of our master plan, moving from the London Underground style map to identifying specific primary and secondary routes. We'll be coming back with this for final adoption on the 10th, as I mentioned earlier. And lastly, we have also continued to deliver all of our projects and train and kicked off these first 2 transitional routes, which Claire will speak to. I'll now hand over to Joe, who will take you through the consultation and bike network changes.
Good afternoon, councillors. I hope you can hear me. Can someone let me know you can?
I can hear you fine, Joe.
Great, thank you. Next slide, please, Ollie. So, as Alita alluded to, and as you'll be fully aware, we consulted on Panaki through November and December alongside the district plan, the draft district plan, and Let's Get Wellington Moving, particularly the MRT ideas. The bike network plan, we received 1,140 submissions, which was a pretty good turnout for a strategic document, particularly in the context of COVID and those other consultation things, which arguably have more scale of interest for the community. So 1,140 submissions to a strategic document is a really good turnout. We also got over 300 submissions to the thing we tried, the Tamariki zone, to get some understanding of what children, the younger people that don't normally engage with us, think about cycling and the provision of bike infrastructure. In terms of the main consultation and responses, as you can see there, 87% of respondents either supported or strongly supported the plan. So that's a pretty good endorsement that we had it pretty right at that first draft. It's contrasted with 10% of respondents opposing or strongly opposing the plan. In a similar way, 89% of respondents believe that the long-term impact of this will be positive or very positive, contrasted with about 4% who held alternative views. Next slide, please, Ollie. So all that feedback has been assimilated, and the detail of that is being reported to you next week. You had access to the submission summary report that was circulated before this workshop. There were 5 big themes that came out of the feedback. The first one was just get on with it. And obviously that's a message we've heard time and time again through other consultations that we did through the LTP and also through various projects. There were a lot of comments around safety of intersections, the pressure that people feel from the presence of fast vehicles, numbers of vehicles, pinch points, both mid-block and intersections. Lots of concerns around that were raised through the submissions. The installation approach, principally around the idea of the transitional approach, feedback was generally supportive of finding faster ways to trial and adapt. There were a lot of design suggestions and a lot of considerations for perhaps go here rather than here, and we'll take you through some of the detail on that in the next few slides. And of course, a raft of concerns, principal concerns being, exactly what is going to be put where and when, and concerns obviously around the impact, particularly on street parking as streets are changed from their current layouts. The feedback produced around 1,000 comments on locations, and we were able to group those into 378 particular themed comments and have provided a response to each of those themed comments. And that's resulted in over 20 recommended changes to the draft strategic bike network. And we'll go through some of the detail on that now. Next slide, please. So just as an overview, and as you'd appreciate, this is a bit of a moving journey. At the long-term plan stage, we were working off the idea of the strategic network as defined in the previous master plan. We didn't have a full network length identified at that time, and we had assumed that 74 kilometres of network needed to be delivered by the council at a cost of 226 million. That was the basis that we were talking about through effectively May last year. Part of the decision for LTP was to refresh the master plan, and through that work, we defined the strategic bike network. The defined network had a network length, centerline length of 147 kilometres, of which at that point in time, we thought 90 kilometres would need to be delivered by the City Council, and that was what was contained in the consultation document. Our current thinking, based on our recommended changes to the plan as a result of the feedback, is that the strategic network length goes from 147 to 166 kilometres, and that the council would be responsible for about 111 kilometres of that network. And at the current funding level, that means about 2/3 of that network can be delivered over the next 10 years. Next slide, please. So just breaking that down, you'll be a little bit familiar with this slide. It's a slight variation, obviously, from the one you've seen before and the one that was included in the bike network plan. But from the top, we've changed the built or being built from 23 kilometres down to 22 kilometres, effectively reflecting that part around a parade needs to be upgraded. There was strong submissions about the need to provide separated facilities, particularly in those busy pedestrian areas, and big shared spaces aren't, by any means ideal. So that's been acknowledged, and that's caused a change in that particular statistic. In working more closely with Let's Get Wellington Moving, and now that the City Streets program is defined, we have refined the responsibility for Let's Get Wellington Moving, which still assumes the City Streets program, MRT, and the strategic highways components will be responsible for delivering parts of this network as part of the Let's Get Wellington Moving program. So it's now 33 kilometres. And as I say, that leaves the remainder 111 kilometres for the City Council. Next, please. So working through the recommended changes from the top at a pretty high level, there's some relatively minor changes around the Tawa Town Centre, where the proposed primary network was going via the existing Aratara pathway through Grassleys Reserve. And in response to submissions, we're now recommending that stay north on the street to get closer to the entrance of the college and the intermediate school, and also provide a secondary connection from that Grassleys Reserve area, Tawa Pool, back to the town centre. Coming down the map, in Granada North, we're recommending a secondary, yep, thank you, Ollie. We're recommending a secondary connection from Takapū Station up into the Lincolnshire Farm development area. Further south into Churton Park, the existing lanes on Westchester Drive, we agree it's appropriate to designate those as part of the secondary network. And then down into the Johnsonville area. So there was coordinated submissions from the Johnsonville Residents Association, the business group, and some local businesses who submitted that Johnsonville Road itself should be removed from the strategic network. And this was couched in a number of ways. There was concerns about the appropriateness of that route, the way it connects to Narunga Gorge being far from ideal, and suggesting that perhaps Onslow Road was better. That consideration be given to Moorfield Road and Broderick Road, i.e. the west and south of the Johnsonville Triangle, rather than Johnsonville Road itself. Considering that feedback and the reasons why we're trying to establish this network, officers will be recommending to council next week that all 3 sides of the Johnsonville Triangle be part of the primary bike network, and that the connection between Johnsonville and Nio, because that's picking up a lot of catchment on the way and is at a certain point the preferred route to connect into Nio Gorge and into the city that way, should also be upgraded from secondary network to primary network. Down into the Kandala area, we had submissions that Onslow Road, particularly the bottom part of it, was not really suitable for upgrading. And, upon reflection, we have concurred with that and are recommending that that part of the network be taken out of secondary network and not part of the strategic network. So the flat bit up near Cashmere School would remain in, but the bottom half would be taken out of the strategic network. That's offset by the addition of a bridle track connection. Yep, that route there from the bottom of Nio Gorge up into Cashmere Ave. Moving further south into the Wadestown area, the route we had proposed was kind of the main route up Linnell Road, Grant Road, and many submitters suggested that Wadestown Road was a much better route. We have accepted that feedback and are recommending the change. So Linnell Wadestown not being removed from the strategic network, and all of Wadestown Road being added to the strategic network. At the west end of that, a connection Blackridge Road to connect that north-south Karori Johnsonville route to the Wadestown area is also recommended. Down into the Karori area, there are 4 new proposals in that area. Some of the submissions talked about avoiding Karori Road, kind of in a similar way that some of the Johnsonville submitters talked about avoiding Johnsonville Road. Our view remains that the challenges of the route don't negate the fact that that is still the preferred route for quality transport connections. But we have added some additional routes. So in the, what would it be, southeast, yeah, a Birdwood route, a connection extending Karori Road through to the Macra Peak Mountain Bike Park for fairly obvious reasons, a route to the north parallel to the main road, thanks Ollie, and a connection through Old Karori Road through to Ian Galloway Park, which just augments the secondary network around that primary network we had defined in the draft plan. Moving to the south, we've accepted that the plan was weak in terms of a connection between Vogeltown and Mornington, and so a route there has been defined. And at the south end of Newtown, in that area, thank you, Ollie, we're recommending adding parts of Ridderford Street, Luxford Street, and to provide connections through to Swiss, Newtown Park, and the zoo. In Hataitai, there's a connection in Moxham Avenue that we expect to be delivered through the City Streets program. And that's really to acknowledge the fact that the primary connection through Mount Victoria, Ruahine Street and Wellington Road is likely to be a longer term delivery through the Strategic Highways program. There's one last nuance I need to point out on this slide, and that's the treatment of the waterfront and the waterfront Keys route. In the primary network, in the draft plan, the waterfront route itself was recommended or included as being a primary network. The feedback we had on that really questioned that from 2 perspectives. One was that a lot of people thought the preferred route would actually be on the waterfront Keys route, mostly because the waterfront is shared space. So, it's pedestrian priority. It's not, while it's bike friendly from a safety perspective, it is shared space, and that at times causes concern for other users of the space. It's constrained in many parts, and there's a speed limit of 10 kilometers an hour in there as well. So we accepted that feedback and are recommending that the waterfront route itself become a secondary route. But the trick with the waterfront quays route is that that is really likely to be the space where the mass rapid transit solution is going to occupy. And Let's Get Wellington Moving in our thinking is that the MRT solution is the priority mode for that space. And so we are recommending that we signal that if space is available, the waterfront quays route is a preferred primary route. But we're also signaling that we don't think that that's achievable at our current understanding. But if space becomes available, then we should be able to use it. I think that's the end of what I need to say on that slide. Thanks, Holly. Are there any questions on that rather large amount of material I just tried to communicate?
Wonderful. Well, look, thank you for your hard work, and it's great to see that you've made changes in response to consultation. So yes, we will have councillor questions now, because I'm sure people will have some. So Councillor Rush and then Councillor Foon. Thank you.
Yeah, just on you mentioned the long-term project in Hataitai. I canvassed some folks in Hataitai about using the bus tunnel for cycling. Is that something that we can look at as an interim measure while this other stuff is all being built?
So the consideration to use the bus tunnel was a specific submission. Our response to that is that a short answer is no. Slightly long answer is that the bus tunnel is a single lane hole with no safe space for separated space for people on bikes. So it's currently designated as a bus only lane, and we believe that that's an appropriate setting from a safety perspective.
But people cycle behind the buses through Lambton Quay and all sorts of places. Can't they cycle behind the bus?
Well, as I say, from a safety perspective, we certainly don't regard that as an appropriate solution for up there. And so, we certainly wouldn't be recommending that change.
All right, thank you. Councillor Foon.
Kia ora, and yeah, thank you for this work. Going through all of those submissions, and really, I know that this is very detailed, so you've done well. So question is around the timing of the newer additional routes, or will the whole timing be rejigged? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so Paul's going to take us through some insights around the timing next. I think as a way of introducing that, the timing of this program will be rejigged. It's a constantly evolving thing. It needs to coordinate with the likes of Let's Get Wellington Moving, with the massive infrastructure upgrade programs that Wellington Water is going to be undertaking. All sorts of things come into play in terms of the actual timing. But Paul will talk more about that after we finish this particular section.
Thank you. Councillor Young and then Condi.
So I've just got some questions about the slides. They haven't got numbers. Oh, yes, they have got numbers. So slide 4, decisions and direction. It says, I assume that this is, that you are anticipating there'll be a 40% reduction in deaths and serious injuries. I wonder how many deaths there have been related to cycling, over what period? I mean, what data is that based on?
Okay, so I can answer that one kind of quickly. The 40% reduction in deaths and serious injuries is the target associated with that Wellington Regional Land Transport Plan that was adopted in the middle of the year. It sets a target that by 2030, we want to see a 40% reduction in deaths and serious injuries right across our transport network in the Wellington region.
40% of what?
40% of the deaths and serious injuries that are currently occurring throughout the region.
So what are those figures?
So the council's roading program, its investment in cycleways is all part of helping to achieve that target.
I'm asking where the 40% reduction, so I want some numbers behind the 40%. I mean, is that 40% of 20 deaths a year or 40% of 1,000 deaths a year?
I'll have to get those numbers to you separately, Councillor.
Because it's pretty important.
The regional council has that data available. I just don't have it with me for this presentation.
So then it's the one where they've got household spending on transport by income quintile. I mean, of course, it's blindingly obvious. If you're on, transport costs are roughly the same for everybody. So of course, if you're on a high income, it's going to be a much smaller percentage of your income. So I just thought that was sort of ridiculous. And then the next one is 70%. This is slide number 7. There's always been a question mark about the survey of 76% would consider cycling if safe, blah, blah. Can you just remind me where that 76% came from, what survey it was?
So that was out of a propensity for cycling survey that we undertook in 2014.
Yeah.
And I believe that the survey methodology used the Wellington City Council panel at the time, which is that representative group that we invite feedback from for various purposes. And that was the population that we surveyed to derive that particular figure.
Yeah, I know there've been a lot of question marks about the veracity of that previously. I just find it impossible to believe that 76%, when you consider the age profile of our city, I think it's a nonsense. However,
so just to clarify, what it's saying is that 76 people said they would use cycling more for some trips, some of the time, if good, safe infrastructure was provided. So it's not saying that 3/4 of people are suddenly going to take up cycling for everything. There's no way it should be interpreted that way. But it's saying that there is a significant potential for more people to use bikes for some trips, some of the time.
So would it be more accurate to say would consider occasional cycling?
I don't think that's what Mr. Hewitt said. Councillor, can I just ask you just to moderate your language a little bit when officers are presenting? Thank you.
What's immoderate about that?
Just a few of your comments. Have you got any other questions?
Nope, that's it.
Thank you. Councillor Condi and then Ms. Parkinson. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I've just got a question about the waterfront quays and what you were saying. Partly that I'm going to just start with some clarification. So what I think I heard you say is that our intention is to change the plan so that the waterfront quays are the primary cycle route and that the actual waterfront shared space is a secondary cycle route.
Yes.
But that actually, in conjunction with Let's Get Wellington Moving, we don't think we can actually put a cycleway on the waterfront quays.
Yes. And so what that means in practice is that we are really, really relying on that really good connection from the Thornton Quay Hut Road through the Featherston Street, Victoria Street, Willis Street Pier connection to be the primary north-south connection through through the city. And if we can get something on the Quays route, we'll take that too. But in practice, we just don't think that's doable. Okay. So it really does put emphasis on the Featherston Street corridor as being the best, strongest connection through the northern part of the city.
Okay.
CBD.
I think my reaction to that is it's just really important that we're clear about how we communicate that, because I really don't like the idea of people getting the impression that we will put a primary cycleway on the Quays at a time when we're basically saying there is no way we can put a primary cycleway on the Quays. That's just my quick feedback on that. My other question is about when you said there's not room for a cycleway and MRT on the waterfront quays. Again, I'm curious about the assumptions that undersit that, because that's what, a 6, almost 8 lane piece of road. So the idea that there's just not room, that it doesn't hold water. Clearly we're prioritizing other things for other spaces. So can you unpack that for me as well, please?
Well, I can unpack it to the extent that the Quays routes itself, that's Jervois Quay, Custom House, Waterloo, vary in width throughout it. and certainly at the pinch points, there is a lack of space between the boundary to the boundary provision. An MRT solution requires more than a couple of lanes of space to have an appropriate buffer space and a safe operating envelope. The Keys route, given the amount of detuning we envisage in other parts of the city, still needs to have some traffic lanes on it. And there's also a desire for a second PT spine for buses. The temporal application of that remains to be seen, because obviously while you're upgrading Lambton Quay, for instance, buses will need to be rerouted to some extent to ensure that capacity is achieved and all that kind of stuff. So the ability to then have more than a traffic lanes of space allocated and keep everything else you need in that corridor becomes very constrained. And so the words that we've developed, which you'll see in the report next week, make it clear that while we like the idea and signal clearly that we would desire it to be a primary cycling connection, that we don't think that's achievable as we currently understand it. But if space becomes available, then we should lock it in. So we have explained that quite carefully in the plan, or in our recommended changes to the plan, I should say.
Right, thank you. And a particularly warm welcome to Ms. Parkinson from the Tawa Community Board. Good to see you here.
Tēnā koutou, thank you to the Chair for the invite. Joe, I've got the privilege of just focusing on the northern part. I realise you've got a lot of detail to cover, so I'm a little bit concerned. I'm partly here today because I'm aware the Tawa Business Group and their submission had a strong concern about one of the secondary routes in Tawa, and I didn't hear you mention that at all in the recommended changes. That's the one that goes through New World, at the back of New World, or the northern side of New World car park. I was just wondering when the board might expect to get some details on what the recommended changes are. Just acknowledging that the board had a bit of a weird year last year, so we perhaps weren't on top of all these major submissions that we might have liked to be, but we've also working towards getting to being a different part of the process so that we're not just treated like a consultation group. We are actually elected members and we'd like to get the information so we can do our job. So thank you for the information and the opportunity to take part now, but have got that concern, and the board itself has the concern about some of the secondary routes, and would like to know, not necessarily now, but at some point soon, how that's going to be addressed. Thanks.
I can start by answering that, Joe. So Robin, I've just been talking to Dem Services today, arranging to come to a board meeting on the 8th to talk specifically around those areas. So we'll be zooming in on that in that meeting specifically. So that's sort of the high level. And then Joe, I don't know if you want to address the changes that were suggested.
Yeah, so the secondary route, which was effectively connecting the Aratawa pathway across the pedestrian bridge at Tawa Station and into the Tawa Centre, is still recommended to be classed as a secondary connection for the purpose of this plan, and signalling the need to upgrade those kind of facilities in the fullness of time. The current setting on that pedestrian bridge, for instance, is it's basically a single lane pathway. The signage at the end says that's the way to get to the Tawa Centre, and asks cyclists to dismount, which is far from a satisfactory level of service. That's not something that we would look to tackle as part of improving the network over the next decade or so, but next time, I guess it's either the regional council or Kiwi Rail, or a combination of those two, upgrade or replace the pedestrian bridge, then a multimodal bridge, would clearly be a desired improvement.
Okay, my understanding
by the setting.
Sorry, my understanding was most of the concern was actually centred at the other end of the route, where it exits out onto the main road. seemed to be an unsuitable location.
Through the car park piece.
Yeah.
And look, the current way it's set up, that's undoubtedly true. And again, that's why signalling that change over time is appropriate through this plan, we believe is an appropriate setting.
Kia ora, thank you.
But we'll talk more detail at another time for sure.
Can you hear us, Councillor Day?
Sorry, I think you were on mute, Councillor Pennant.
Oh, apologies, it was my fault, sorry.
You've been talking to yourself. Thank you. And just following on from what Robin said, I am curious, and this is more of a citywide sort of question. We've had someone from Johnsonville, who's a cyclist, who has made a suggestion about a connection that would mean you avoid the kind of the really busy Moorfield Johnsonville Road roundabout going up past the fire station, up Frank Johnson Street to be able to get up into Newlands or go that way to Tawa, just as another alternative route that might feel a bit safer for people who aren't as confident to navigate some pretty big full-on intersections. Will this plan sort of leave any opening for any little bits like that where you might actually through the process discover a slightly safer or more appealing route for cyclists and actually maybe even other road users?
Yes, the idea with the strategic network is, and I'm fairly sure we have words in the existing draft plan that says something like these are the routes where we expect the bike network to be developed. Now, obviously, as we get into a particular place and work out just what the best way of achieving that is, there obviously needs to be room to adjust and formulate appropriate plans based on specific context and much finer grained detail. That's not really available to us at this level of drawing connections on a plan and trying to assign that to a certain street. So generally speaking, the routes that we have identified are the routes where we expect that stuff will be implemented, but nuances around details, are clearly up for development.
Thank you. I mean, just one other question. Will any of the bits that we're doing potentially be two-way cycle lanes, or are we looking at sort of trying to keep within the layout that is there? What's the sort of thinking around that? Thinking like Johnsonville Road, someone suggested, could you do two-way cycle lane on one side?
Yeah, so look, that's all next stage stuff. So at this stage, clearly, in most places, we want a two-way connection on these routes, because if you go somewhere, you usually want to get back.
Sorry, I meant two-way, like having both
so
on the same side of the road.
So the fact is that in most places we want bi-directional travel. Whether we achieve that on each side of the road or together on one side of the road or the other side, or in really rare circumstances, two-way in the middle. I haven't seen an application for that in Wellington that makes sense, although actually, to be fair, between Kent and Cambridge Terrace, that is a solution that we are currently developing. So the exact form is definitely next stage, when we start to work out exactly what the right way to fit everything we're trying to do in a corridor into that space. And we're talking about, meeting the needs of pedestrians, meeting the needs of bikes, meeting the needs of buses, meeting the needs of cars, meeting the needs for parking, all that stuff. It is all next stage development.
Right, so everything's still on the table, really, as far
Very
as
much.
the way it looks. Cool, thank you.
Thank you. I've got two questions now. I presume there's no added cost as a result of these changes?
That would be an incorrect assumption.
Oh, darn it. Okay. So is that going to be significant?
Yes, that is. Well, at this stage, that is a significant potential cost increase. Yes.
Right. So you'll need to come back to us with.
We've identified the cost in the paper.
Okay. Oh, you're quite quiet on that particular point. All right.
Liam,
but yeah, I think just quickly, Joe, I mean, that's right. There was additional cost because, of course, there's additional cycleways that we've added as part of the consultation feedback. So, but we've got more than enough to do with the budget you've given in the next 10 years is the key message.
Right. I was just wondering if you'd move things around to accommodate that. Okay. And then just the other question, the rather vexed issue of safe passage from Central City through Mount Victoria to the eastern suburbs. I'd agree the bus tunnel is not appropriate, but the tunnel is, in the Never Land and has some issues with it. Is there any way that we can make safe passage through the town belt, or at least make it easier for cyclists to get through the bus tunnel on the bus?
I guess there's a couple of quick answers to that one. In terms of cyclists getting through the bus tunnel on the bus, they can do that. They just have to hang their bike on the front of the bus on the bike racks that are on the front of nearly every bus in the city these days. They're just not allowed to ride their bike through that space because of the safety concerns that I've talked about before. In terms of additional connections across Mount Victoria itself, we have identified a potential route from the velodrome area, I think, through across the top, that we are adding to our minor works program for further investigation.
Okay, so there'll be more discussion about that. Councillors, are there any first-time questions just before we go back to Councillor Foon? No. Okay, Councillor Foon, off you go.
Apologies, I have a weed eater outside. It's not mine, but one of the hazards of working in the burbs. Just in regard to Councillor Rush's post there about the survey, I guess the question, one of them that I've been wanting to ask, has there been any thought to redoing the survey, if we would or wouldn't, or when would we normally review a survey? I think it would be quite good to, just have we given any thought to that, and could anyone give an explanation about what we might do and when we might do it? Thank you.
I guess we've thought about it to the extent that it's probably tens of thousands of dollars to repeat the exercise, and I just not seeing the value in that kind of expenditure for something that's kind of not telling us that much. What we know, and we've seen this in a number of surveys around the place, is that there are different classes of people interested in cycling. So at one end of the scale, you've got the fit and the fearless. I like to call them the skinny tire brigade. They'll go anywhere kind of as fast as they can, often wearing lycra kind of thing. At the other end of the scale, you've got the no way, no how people, and they're kind of a quarter to a third of people, for whatever reason, they're just not interested in cycling. And then you've got a range of groups in the middle, which broadly we call the interested and concerned. And they're the target market in terms of developing cycleways for. The safer we can make them, the more connected we can make them, the more we can attract people of that segment, which is perhaps over a third of the population. The more of those people we can attract to it, to free up space on the bus, to use their cars less for health benefits and for carbon CO2 reduction benefits, the better, and that's the target market. Wellington's research aligned pretty well with what we saw in that previous, and other overseas research. So there really isn't too much benefit in investing tens of thousands of dollars to get a specific Wellington answer to that. What we're seeing is that the uptake in cycling has been strong for the last 20 years, and even stronger in those places where we have actually started to implement some improvements. a lot of those improvements aren't yet connected up. Evans Bay, we've done some good stuff at the top, done some good stuff at Cobham Drive, but it's still, there's a big gap in the middle of it. So until we get all that stuff connected up, we can't really prove our case to the strength that some people would like us to. But I'm not sure another survey is going to assist that very much at all.
Thanks, Joe, much appreciated.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we've finished that section and it's Claire's turn now, I understand.
I think Paul's going to quickly jump in here. Yeah.
Sorry, apologies, Paul. And then, so we've got an hour left. Paul, how long do you think this section will be?
I've got 6 slides, so I'll try and get through them pretty quick. 4 of them are the map that we've shared with you already, so it's only 2 that I'm already talking to.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Cool. So we heard from Vida about the why we're doing this. Joe's just gone through the where are we going to do it, and so between the next 2 presentations with Claire and myself, I'm just going to cover off the more about how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it. And so you'll be aware from the previous workshops we've had with you, we've split the program into 2, a transitional part of the program and a transformational part of the program. So Claire leads on our transitional program, and I've been put in charge of the street transformation part. So you'll see that as we start to develop the program and on the next few slides. Slightly different way in which we're approaching these. The transitional street improvements, which the next hour Claire will go through, is the pop-up cycleway. It's the sort of the quick get in and do it, and we're going to do those through traffic management plans. Slightly different than the way we've done them in the past. This is more similar to the way we did Brooklyn Hill, where we use the powers we have under the RC as an RCA, Road Controlling Authority, to temporarily make changes to the roading network. Once we've made those temporary changes, we then want to go and engage with the public, run the sort of more of a formal consultation around did they like it, be able to tweak and follow it up with that very formal traffic resolution. And at that point, as we did on Brooklyn Hill, councillors will then be asked to make the changes formally to our traffic resolutions by adopting the changes that have been already put out there and trialled. The street transformation projects are a little bit different, and they follow the more traditional way in which we've done these cycleways, where we'll plan the projects and then engage with the community beforehand, get an approval from yourselves, and then start to develop. So the next slide, Ollie. We've tried to spell this out a little bit clearer in this section. So the blue sections on the left are the transitional, and the green on the right is the transformation. So you see at the top line, we've got the community engagement. So the engagement happens all the way through the development of those projects. And again, Claire's going to go through this in more detail. As we deliver the projects, we're engaging as we go, and then we follow up after we've sort of tweaked and evaluated what's there, and follow up with a council decision to adopt a traffic resolution. Whereas the street transformation projects, they almost the other way around, and that we come up with a design, get options from the community, and we approve the paper version before we put anything out on the street. Now, by doing it this way, we're able to follow, so that when we're doing the transformation, we're not starting from scratch. We're able to build upon the work that was done previously. When we go through the program, you'll start to see that in some cases, the gap between the transitional program and the transformation program could be some years. You'll see in Brooklyn Hill, we've finished that work. We hope to get the transformation project out next year. So it's going to be about 18 months that'll be in place before we'd follow up with the long-term changes. But in some of the network, it could be 4 to 5 years that the transitional was in place before the transformation project follows through. Okay, we'll just go through the maps. So we've put together 4 maps. This is the map showing where we believe the network will get to by July or end of June next year. So it's over the next 18 months. The dotted blue lines is the transitional parts of the network. The green is what's out there at the moment. So over the next 18 months, we're going to start to see a lot more of the blue coming in. Claire's going to talk through the program for that. And clearly, we've got the first 2 corridors of Botanic through to the city and Newtown through to the city. And again, that's the focus of the next presentation. But we're also going to start a lot more of the transitional program. Cool. Moving forward to the next. The following years, this takes us out to the end of the 3-year LTP period. At this point, we start to bring some of the transformation projects in as well. So there is more blue in this network, and some of those solid black lines are starting to make their presence felt. By the end of the 10 years, I have to go to the next one. This is where the network will get us. And Councillor Pennant, you asked about the costs. This is where we believe the current budget settings will allow us to get to within the 10-year period. Back at the LTP, we're going to deliver a smaller network within 10 years. Now it's a lot larger network. We still believe we can get the entire network in place by 2031, but some of it will still be sitting in a transitional state. So if we go to the last slide there, Ollie, and this would be that final state. Now we haven't said how much longer that would take, and that all depends on the settings that we see come through in future LTPs. But if we just roll back one, I just want to cover on that point that we still believe that the entire network, the 111 kilometres that the city would be delivering, would be in place within that 10-year period. Cool, just go forward those 2 more slides, Ollie. So that was the how we're doing it, and now this is sort of when, and there's a lot to unpack under here. We've broken these down into about 13 areas, but within that we've projectized 62 projects across the whole city over the next period of time. We've tried to show that the blue with the transitional program, which Claire will talk about, will get it almost all done within 3 years. There's a couple of projects that slip out beyond that 3-year program where we talked about getting it all in within 3. And you can start to see the transformational program, which is the larger, more expensive, the more labour intensive in terms of our contractors and our design process. Our consultation process will take longer. And as we get further into the program, that gap between the transitional and transformational just becomes larger. While we've tried to roll this up to area-wide, the projects that sit below it, they're all subject to change. And Joe touched upon that in his presentation, that we haven't tested yet with our partners, we haven't tested with the other service authorities. Assumptions that we've made that we can get into a bit of the network. We'll have a 12-month window to build, maybe shot to pieces once we explore who else is planning on being in that bit of the network at that time. So lots of work still to happen to program this, and we'll be doing that work over the next few months just to get a better, higher level program. But the individual projects that fall out of that, they will also go through their own project programming. Also, that's just quickly about when and how we're going to do it. Is there questions of that? Otherwise, we can go on to Claire, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about the transition.
Well, that was an important presentation, Paul. Thank you. There will be questions. Councillor Fung.
Just talking about joining the dots. So the Island Bay to Parade timing, so that looked like it was going to stay transitional. Can you just unpack that? Because I just, of course, see that's a really important dot to join up, especially if we're going to do the transitional through to Newtown, through to the city.
So just clarifying, you're talking about the parade itself? The
parade to Newtown, yes.
Yep.
Or parade to city.
Yes. So the connection from the north end of Island Bay through to the city, we'll look to put that in a transitional way. The permanency of that would come from Let's Get Wellington Moving. And we don't believe that there is a solution there within 10 years. If it is, that would be great. But that 10-year program, we would see that being sitting there under their program. It's not the permanent solutions, not for the city to deliver through there.
Okay, so it's still 3 years design delivery of the transitional.
Yes, route. That's right. So yeah, we're expecting to be in place within 3 years.
Thanks, Paul. If I'm around. Sorry, Just
You
had
don't
to
have
joke.
to be, Councillor
Yeah, I
Finn.
know.
It's not compulsory. Councillors, any other questions? So just, can I just ask, because I did have a discussion with Vida this morning, so just to be absolutely clear, there will be two kinds of traffic resolutions, a global one and then a specific one, just so that everyone's clear on that.
Well, yep. So on the 10th of March, we'll be looking for councillors to adopt a strategic traffic resolution, and that would be a resolution on every road within the bike network plan, and that's at that high level. And it really signals as City Council, as a road controlling authority, we're signalling our intent that there would be that these are primary routes, or primary and secondary routes, if you like, for cycling. The designation will be as a special vehicle lane, so that again would signal for buses and bikes along those corridors. When we follow up with those formal traffic resolutions, which is the 2 points there at the end of the transitional and the beginning of the transformational, a full traffic resolution is required at that point, and that's the bit that takes out the existing restrictions that are there and puts the new ones in. We would expect that rather than have a cycleway for the full length of a road, would still have to break it up and allow for buses to also be in different parts of it. So there's a lot of detail that still would follow, and that would be done in a normal way in which we would do our traffic resolution. But it's the strategic intent of the City Council as a road controlling authority that you'd be asked to do that now, and then each project would bring its own.
Okay, and Councillor Rush has asked a question about how you address slope and gradient. He maintains that European guidelines would rule most of these out.
And yes, and I know, and I'm halfway through a response to Councillor Rush on that. There's lots of information on that. When we've done a lot of work through here at a strategic model. So we've built a model, and we've in that we've put some penalties for uptake based on gradients. So that's helped us trying to calculate the level of uptake, and even on some of our steeper parts of our network, and applying those penalties to uptake, we still believe it's a worthwhile improvement, that the uptake is such that it will meet the objectives of moving us in the direction we want to go. But I will respond with a fuller response directly to Councillor Rush.
And I presume keep practicing is also, helpful to keep better at those slopes. Right.
Yeah, e-bikes have made just a massive difference in slopes.
That's right. Okay, so no other questions, councillors? All right, everything's clear then. Thank you very much. All right, Claire, sorry, now it is your turn. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. Good to see you all again. I can't see or hear myself, but I'm assuming it's working, so yell out if it's not. This session is to update you on how we've been progressing on your direction last May to accelerate the delivery of the bike network within 3 years. So we are 10 months into our 3 years, and we've made really good progress on our first 2 critical routes. We're getting close to being able to implement them. So we wanted to brief you before the information goes up on the website this week, and also before some of the early preparation work starts this week as well. So I also just wanted to tautoko what Vida had said earlier about the current climate in Wellington and some of the stress and anxiety that we know lots of people are feeling at the moment. Our team is really aware and conscious of this context, and we've definitely had it in the front of our minds over the last couple of weeks as we've been having discussions with people along the way. Thanks, Ollie. So I'm hoping to get through the content in around half an hour, and then we've got lots of time for questions afterwards. So first, we just wanted to recap, and you've seen a slide similar to this already today, just on how we got here in terms of these transitional projects. So in May, the long-term plan decision allocated the budget to the bike network over the next 10 years, and it put 50 million in these first 3 years with a direction to accelerate the delivery of the bike network. You asked us to come back and tell you how we planned to do that. So in August, that's when we had that workshop where we brought back this idea of the transitional process, which is what we had used on the Brooklyn Hill cycleway, where we engage the public in real time with street changes we can adapt. So in September, you approved the draft bike network plan to go out to public consultation, but you also endorsed us to start with these 2 projects so we could get on with it and set up our ways of working with this process so we were ready to scale up, by which time we'll only have 2 of the 3 years left for that big network. So in terms of public consultation and engagement, the why, which Peter had talked about before, has been really clearly established through the long-term plan, Planning for Growth, Te Ata Kura, and Let's Get Wellington Moving, and those were all consulted and engaged on. The what was decided through the budget decision in the long-term plan, which was also consulted and engaged on. The what is a connected bike network, and the where has been consulted and engaged on through the bike network plan, but also through other engagements like Newtown connections, and also actually the parking policy, where the hierarchy of parking on different types of streets was engaged on. So what we're doing now is getting on with exactly how we do it on each route. And this engagement is following, like we said, this process similar to Brooklyn Hill. So like many other cities around the world, we are using this faster, more temporary process delivered under a temporary traffic management plan to gather data and evidence as well as public feedback in real time to help and refine the designs before coming back to you for a traffic resolution. You'll remember that when we came back on the Brooklyn Hill cycleway, we were able to provide some good evidence about the actual impacts of the changes and a few suggested design tweaks based on that feedback. The process allowed us to get something on the ground much quicker and at a much lower cost than our normal way of working, and it improved the quality of the feedback that we got. So it's that same process that we're using for these 2 routes, but given the nature of them, we're also relying heavily on the parking policy from 2020 and we had in Brooklyn. So we just wanted to quickly recap on some of the network principles that we discussed in that August workshop last year. So we talked about how safety really underpins everything that we do. It's inherent in our work. So we've taken that one out here. But you told us the 2 asterisk principles on the slide here are the 2 that with that councillor workshop last year were prioritised as the most important. So you told us it was essential to maximise uptake and to create cohesive routes that are connected. So that's why we haven't stopped at the hard parts for these routes, and we've sought a design that delivers a safe, connected route that will attract the highest number of users. But we're also delivering some good multimodal benefits through these designs, including some bus lane improvements and benefits for pedestrians who get particularly frustrated when bikes and scooters use the footpath. So creating the space to get them off the footpath is a key benefit for pedestrians. Given that we are working in this transitional way and looking to avoid moving curbs, which is expensive and time consuming, we did require some design trade-offs and a few early preparation works, but given the constraints of the corridors, we've tried to make use of every single centimetre of street space. So this next slide will also be familiar from that workshop in last August. There's no city in the world that hasn't found delivering a bike network challenging. We know we can't make everyone happy, but we can deliver something that helps us prepare the city for the future and gives people choices as we grow and decarbonise. So the next 6 months are likely to be some of the hardest of the next 10 years, where we actually start delivering on the plan. We're already having some difficult conversations in some specific sites along these routes. And for the John Street intersections in particular, which I know a lot of you have been involved with, we're slowing our design work down there so that we can work through some of these operational issues for the final designs with that group of businesses. So it's not just an emotional journey for council laws and council staff, it is also for the people of Wellington and the businesses, as these are big changes and we need to give people time to adapt. So what we want to do now is jump into the two projects. Why, just to come back to why these two have been chosen. These are two critical connections from the south and the west of Wellington. Without these two, really developing anything further out in these areas doesn't make a lot of sense to people because they can't get all the way through to the city. So we've got Thorndon Quay that's being worked on, bringing people in from the north. We've been working on Evans Bay and Cobham coming from the east, and we've got Brooklyn as well. So these are the final two sort of central connections into the city. They're already, they're routes that have significant numbers of people on bikes and buses already. And Newtown in particular is a corridor that's been identified for a lot of intensification. So we're expecting a lot more residents along here through the spatial plan. So if we effectively, if we are continuing the way we are today, this part of the city is going to end in gridlock. So this is about trying to offer us people some choices so that we can continue to have that access into the city. It's also important to note that these are both Let's Get Wellington moving corridors. So the permanent works after this will actually be picked up by the program. And we're already starting to see some benefits in terms of how their business case develops based on what we are doing now. These two projects aren't in they're in the mid to longer term Let's Get Wellington moving program. So if we didn't do these transitional projects now, we wouldn't have them in place by that 2024 date of accelerating the bike network. So this is the current situation on these two routes, and it's important to keep this in mind as what we are currently accepting as the level of service. There's some really constrained sections along these routes where we have had to make some design trade-offs, but our base case, which is this, is pretty scary and unsafe. So it's good to just kind of have this in our mind as we take you through what we're looking to change. A big part of these transitional projects is the data and evidence that we collect. So we've been working on pre-collecting data before we put them in, and so we can monitor what the change when we put them in after is. So we've got good information about who's using the corridors, the speeds. We know on Bowen in particular, there are some speeding issues on that section of road. We did a public survey, which was part of our first phase of engagement, and got 309 responses for this corridor, with 2/3 of people saying they didn't think the street provided for active modes, and also showing that we've got pretty low trust in terms of how the council is delivering infrastructure for these modes. So the bus numbers here, that 2447 is the number of people tagging on and off in this section. But the whole route from Karori to the city has 5,700 daily passengers, and that's from the Bus Priority Action Plan, that data. The next slide is the same information for Newtown. So we've got a lot more people on this route already riding by bike, but similar numbers otherwise. And you can see that the Bus Priority Plan has identified this hospital to city corridor as having 10,000 plus daily passengers a day. So that lower number is just the people who tag on and off in this section. That makes sense. Okay, so the design process that we've used to date, it's been, well, how long since we came back? Was in September, has been pretty intense and fast-paced and collaborative. So we've gone through several design iterations, and we've taken on board over, I think we're up to about 1,200 pieces of design feedback. We've had some of New Zealand's leading technical designers of multimodal transport working on these projects, both as part of the working group, but in a reviewer sense as well. We've used those network principles to assess our options, and we've developed a fair amount of collateral, which will be on the website going forward, around the parking management, the road safety audits, an accessibility audit, and a record of all the design decisions that have been made. We've also been engaging as we go from a design perspective, so working with key stakeholders like emergency services and taxi drivers, extensively with Metlink. We've still got a few things to work through with them, And that input has helped us refine our designs to date. One of the key gaps that we've identified through this process is that we don't have an agreed citywide level of service for loading zones, which are essential for servicing the city's businesses and workplaces. So that's a bit of work that we're going to start with Let's Get Wellington Moving, so that we can all be on the same page when we talk to businesses over the coming years, and that they can plan for their future as well. So we'll get now into the designs. The first overview is of the Botanic Garden Kia Pai Kaka to the city. So this goes from outside the Botanic Gardens down to the waterfront. And it's made up of some different types of facilities. Coming downhill from Botanic to Lambton Quay is a shared bus bike lane. That was initially going to be a separated bike lane, but some of the comments through the safety reviews have suggested, because the speeds of the buses and bikes are more similar on a downhill gradient, it's actually preferred to have them sharing in a space that isn't pinned in. So that's what we will be progressing for this. And this information again can feed into the permanent upgrades that Let's Get Wellington Moving will be following with. However, we do have a separated cycleway on the uphill from Lambton Quay up to Bowen, and that's primarily because of that speed differential between the vehicles and the bikes. This intersection that we're looking at here at Bowen and the terrace has significant pedestrian improvements. This was part of the Central City walking improvements, and is introducing a new pedestrian crossing over to Museum Street. It's also raising the pedestrian island on the other side of the street to footpath level, so that'll be good, improved comfort and safety for pedestrians. This involves some permanent works because it was Let's Get Wellington Moving, but we've taken it over so we can incorporate the bike designs in here as well. And then on Whitmore Street, we are looking at one-way separated cycleways on both sides, so we can take you through some images now. So this is the top section, Tēnā Kōrero Road. You can see the separated bike lane going up and then a shared lane coming down. It's a little bit unclear in the background, but there is a vehicle lane and a shared bike lane going down. This bus border, we'll talk about this in a bit more detail later on, but this is an innovative product from Spain, which is made of recyclable material and has got the tick from an accessibility perspective. It's a designed specifically for when a bike lane meets a bus stop, which is one of our design challenges with our widths of our streets. This is the Bowen section, so you can see here the shared bus bike downhill with the sharrows indicating for cyclists to be riding in the centre of that lane, and then the separated uphill cycle lane on the other side. And then Whitmore is the one-way separated cycleways on both sides that connect across over to the waterfront. Moving on now to Newtown, a lot more complexity over on this route. This goes from the waterfront to the hospital and is generally speaking in two sections. There's the Basin Reserve North and the Basin Reserve South. So north of the basin, we will be introducing a bi-directional cycleway. So Councillor Fohn, you were referring to whether we, or Day, I think, whether we ever use those. This is an instance where we are proposing to use bi-directional. We have worked extensively around this Marjorie Banks intersection to the waterfront, and we had looked at ways to get across behind New World, but the safety auditors just basically said there's no transitional way to do that safely. So we've moved it over to the Kent Terrace side so that it can connect to that crossing that gets to the waterfront. And then at the Marjorie Banks intersection, there'll be a signal that gets cyclists diagonally across into the Cambridge Terrace side of the median. We will continue to Bowen and then split into one-way cycleways on either side, up Adelaide and Rutherford. So we can give you some views of that. This route also has significant bus lane improvements. So we'll be giving more priority to the buses along here, which from an economic perspective is actually where a significant amount of the benefits come from. So this is a picture at in the hospital area with those bus borders again, and you can see the separation and then this bus stop integration site. The next slide gives you a view of Adelaide Road and the changes there. So this will have separated cycleways on either side, dedicated bus lanes next to that, and then traffic lanes in the middle with again some of these raised bus stops included. And then finally, this is the Cambridge Terrace mock-up of the two-way bike lane on the Cambridge Terrace side of the road. And this will diagonally at Marjorie Banks get it back across to Kent Terrace. So along the way, you'll see those little works that say placemaking and artwork opportunity. Ollie, we might flick to the next slide. We have been working over the last couple of months with how we work with mana whenua to incorporate some placemaking and storytelling at cultural sites of significance along the way. And we've been working with the Let's Get Wellington Moving mana whenua partnership group, picking up on their development values. And in the next couple of weeks, we've got a co-design session with some of the Māori artists that have been working on Te Ara Tupua, to see if we can bring to life some of these elements down the route where some of the awa and other areas of significance were. So this is something that we're really looking forward to, and we've made some really good progress kind of getting to know each other over the last couple of months. So from a communications and engagement perspective, we've effectively got 4 phases. We are just finishing phase 1 and we're moving into phase 2. So phase 1, we'll go actually to the next slide, Ollie. Since November, we've been having a targeted introduction of these projects. So we got our web pages up in November and we started our high-level business engagement with First Retail, where they basically went and let everybody know something was coming. Of course, we didn't have the designs at that point, so we didn't know what. But that was where we kind of compiled that list of stakeholders along the routes. We also started having kind of more logistical conversations with the likes of the fire service and police and taxis, the blind and low vision, and we're meeting regularly with some of our ongoing partners like Netlink. We had the public baseline surveys in phase 1, and we've got a report that was almost finished to kind of summarize all the engagement from that phase. So next, and this is, this is just, I guess, to point out that there's a range of views to date from the engagement that we've had, and I know many of you will have heard from the businesses that have real concerns about this change. We also wanted to kind of mention that there are many other voices, often that are less heard, that are supportive of these changes, and they can see how their businesses will benefit from these. So we've kind of got that kind of record of engagement for the conversations we've had to date. In terms of what's next, so this week we're going to put a lot of information, and Ollie will tell you that there is a lot, up on the website and start this this phase of building awareness, not just with the public, but with the residents and businesses along the route, now that we've got a preferred design to talk about. So we've got a webinar planned, we've got those subscriber updates, not just the business list, but also the public that have said they want to keep up to date, that we'll be starting to use regularly. And as we get closer to installation, we'll be using those more traditional means of newspapers and social media. We hope to do lots of walk and ride throughs. And yeah, the phase 2 moves into phase 3, and that we will have had a huge list of people by that stage that want to talk to us about it, and that we're talking to it about, so that we can keep that communication going as we move into installation. And then finally, phase 4, which is the actual public consultation, which happens once the routes have been launched. So this is a consultation, which is sort of a show rather than tell approach. We've talked about it. You can see here the timing that we're working to. I would say there are some risks around contractor availability, particularly with COVID. That means that this might change around. We've got the early preparation works, a couple of tweaks at intersections that are happening, basically coming up this week. And then we're looking to start the Newtown route in April. And we're just figuring out timing of which section first. And it'll probably change around with that discussion about the John Street intersection a little bit. So once it's launched, then we move into the community feedback into the adaptation phase. And at the moment, we're planning to deliver the Newtown route first and then move into the Bowen route. So as I've mentioned a few times, the monitoring and evaluation is really critical for these projects. So we're trying to get very clear on what exactly we're measuring in terms of success. So our primary indicators are the percentage of low carbon transport trips. That's what these projects are all about. So we'll be looking at the use, who's using the streets before and after. We'll also be looking into the diversity of users. So these street changes, meaning that we see, for instance, more females riding bikes or more people with mobility issues finding it easier now to get around on the footpath. We'll be monitoring safety, both actual safety and perceived, which we know is really important for cycling. And we'll be measuring, are we delivering these quicker than we have in the past, which is something that we know is really important to you, that how do we actually get these things done? So we'll be tracking how quickly we're moving as well. And just to quick, I'm almost finished, give you a sense, oh, sorry, yep, that's good, Ollie, the next one, of what we'll be adapting. Once they're in, if there are immediate safety concerns, those will be addressed urgently. So anything that we haven't quite got right will be tweaked. Then if there are some absolute no-brainers that's coming through the public feedback that we also agree we haven't quite got right, we'll be trying to tweak those as well. But the majority of the feedback to inform adaptations, we want to come through that formal consultation period, like we did with Brooklyn, where once it's launched, we say, you know, it's now open for 3 weeks to gather your feedback, and we'll be really advertising that feedback process. And then digesting all of that that's come in to make another round of changes. And then finally, the traffic resolution or the permanent upgrades that come afterwards are the opportunity to resolve any final outstanding concerns after that. So that is, I think, pretty much, this, and I don't expect you to read all of these now, but we know you're going to be having a lot of conversations probably about these projects, and you'll get asked a lot of questions. So we want to support you with the information you need. These are some key messages to help with your conversations, but we're really happy to provide other information or take you through the routes on foot or bike to get a better understanding of the designs. We think it's really helpful for the public to get consistent messages about the projects, no matter which part of council they contact. So we'll be using these ones repeatedly, and we encourage you to as well. And then finally, this really is my last slide. Just really wanted to highlight that we're already finding some great innovative new ways of working in response to this request to accelerate delivery. So particularly in things like procurement, where we have worked with some local companies to understand products that are going to work specifically for Wellington, and how do we start ordering them so we don't have months and months of delay once we get the design. So for separation, we know we're going to need a lot of it over the next few years. How do we get smarter with the way we're procuring things so that we can cut down on those sorts of additional times? We're also, I mentioned that mana whenua work, and I think the opportunity for us to incorporate storytelling and placemaking through these projects is a really exciting one. These two have been very technically complex, so it's fair to say that this will be light for these two projects, but now that we have this relationship with the mana whenua group, we think that we can do some really exciting things here. And then finally, the relationship we've made with the New Zealand company that brings in these bus boarders and learning from the Spanish, and we've talked to other cities around the world that are using these products, getting confidence that these things are working elsewhere, is also really, I guess, advancing the sorts of things we're trying to do here and keeping us up to speed with the rest of the world. So that's everything from me, and hopefully we've still got plenty of time now for questions.
Thank you, Chair. That is a huge amount of work, so thank you so much and very exciting. Right, Councillor Calvert and then Councillor Foon, thank you.
Thank you. And I'm just referring to a slide just a couple back where you talked about adaptation and being able to adapt. And you talk about how people are adapting, in particular to COVID. How has the program of work adapted to what COVID has brought about in terms of changing patterns of how people use their places, the central city, the suburban area? So I'm just keen to understand that. And then my second question is, again, relating to adaptation, is that when this was set, this was in without the impacts of COVID and also on the potentially on the finances of the city. If you're procuring resources, is this impacting on other infrastructure projects that we also need to fund and resource?
Yeah, thanks for those questions. So the COVID, in terms of how this program is adapting with COVID, I think it's important to remember that a lot of places around the world have actually instigated this type of work as part of their COVID response. So what we see is that when COVID hit, public transport patronage took an absolute dive, and that happened in New Zealand as well. And so without people feeling like they have public transport as an option for them during the COVID, it really leaves them with not very many options. And in terms of the kind of affordability issues with petrol and everything at the moment, building these sort of socially distanced, affordable ways to still get to your local shops or into town has been a primary part of how cities have adapted. And so while COVID hasn't, in the last few years, we've been extremely fortunate not to have that acute issue. I guess now that we're starting to feel it, this is starting to be really relevant for us as well. And in terms of your question around costs, what we know from Brooklyn and from elsewhere is that this is a much, much more affordable way of getting things done in the short term. And so you have put 226 million into the long-term plan, and we are using the budget that's allocated for the bike network and feeling like we get good value for money when we use this process.
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Foon.
Kia ora, Claire, and thanks to all the team for the work again. We've got no idea how complex it is from our table, so appreciate what's going on. I just have a query around the pop-up and the going to the transitional route through the Newtown part. And Paul mentioned there might be some time between those processes for some of these routes. Can you give me an update or a rough idea of how long that process will take for Newtown with the Let's Get Welly moving in the mix? And then the other question is a procurement circular economy question, but I'll let you answer the first.
Yeah, so the permanent upgrade of the Newtown route will be through Let's Get Wellington Moving, so that'll depend on their timing. My understanding is by the middle of this year, we should have some idea of which option is preferred for MRT, and depending on that, I guess we will have a new time frame set out. But I think we're still in, one of my colleagues can correct me, sort of at least more than 5 to 8 years away from that MRT program starting.
Okay, thank you, that's really helpful. And then the next one really is around, given that we are going to need, is it 111 kilometres of hit sticks possibly, have we looked into a circular economy option using recycled plastic for the barriers, or can we?
Yeah, we can. So the bus stops are made of recyclable products, which was something that, and they are reusable as well. So once we come through and make them permanent, we can transfer them elsewhere. The hit sticks, we can talk to our suppliers about that. We are hoping to be able to reuse those, but we do know from Brooklyn that they can take a bit of a beating. out on the road. So depending on how mangled they get, well, I guess depending on how much we can reuse.
I meant the barriers clear, but we can take that offline. That's okay. Like where the hit sticks go into those.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can raise that with the company that we buy them off.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Free.
Oh, hi. My question is just really related to the sensitivity around businesses, and this might not be something the program can easily address. But if we are making changes and we're going to leave them in place for a little while, but they turn out to be sort of fairly dire for businesses, is there any way we can build in some contingency into the plans? Because I mean, some of these businesses are telling us, rightly or wrongly, that they may go to the wall in months, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think in terms of things like loading, which is what a lot of these conversations that we're having at the moment are, we're kind of exhausting. We're working on about 8 to 10 options at the moment to find workable solutions, and we'll continue to do that once they're in if they show not to be working. I guess it's hard to make kind of design promises at this stage before we haven't seen them in action, and that's really the tricky part in terms of the benefit of having an opportunity to gather the data and evidence means we can stack kind of feedback and evidence up alongside each other. But certainly with things like loading zones, we will be looking for every adaptation we can find until it's working for those businesses.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies, I was just trying to sort something out. No more questions, councillors? Seems clear that you've been incredibly clear. And it may be just
overwhelming.
Need to see the paper and then may have some more questions. But Ono, Councillor Day.
I was just thinking, Laurie shared on our little bike trip the other day, Laurie shared an idea about whether for some of the businesses, if they're concerned about moving of loading zones, whether we could look at like buying trolleys for businesses who might feel that impacted. Is that something we could have a conversation about through this process? Because I do think anything, it seems like quite a small thing to do, but it might make a big difference. And it might not be that many businesses that make it.
I feel like anything's kind of on the table. I think there are some conversations that are showing that any change from now is not going to feel acceptable. And I think that comes back to this point we made about the loading zones and not having kind of a standard level of service that we can talk from. So, if you've had one outside your shop forever and now it's going to move 50 metres, it's very hard for that to ever be acceptable, regardless of trolleys or anything. But we won't always, we've got so many changes to make to our streets, we won't always be able to give a loading zone outside every business. So how do we offer things like that, but also manage expectations about what's feasible as we change into the future?
I just feel like sometimes a little, even if it's quite a small thing, it can just be a gesture of acknowledgement that, that this change is challenging. But yeah, thanks for your presentation. Really good. So much thinking's been happening. It's awesome.
Thank you, Councillor Matthews.
It's not a question, I'm afraid, but I just want to say how the whole session, how impressed I am at how much quality work has happened, and it's really, really exciting to see, thinking about, my ward and in our local area, just seeing what's going to happen and what is happening. And I just want to say thank you so much. I know that we threw a really ambitious challenge to the whole organisation, and I'm just thrilled with what we're seeing as the outcome.
What a positive comment. Thank you, Councillor Matthews. Any other comments, questions? All right, well, look, again, staff, thank you very much for all your incredible work. You have really, really tried hard, and as Councillor Matthews says, very ambitious program. So we look forward to seeing the paper next week, and of course people will be able to ask questions, but hopefully it will just be a bit easier now that you've had this briefing. All right, thank you everyone. Have a great afternoon.